Working through the question, trying to answer the question, does God exist? And we touched on various arguments, the moral argument, we're not going to rehash any of this, the moral argument, which basically says, why are there morals if we're just the product of chance? Chance would not produce morals. It's a great argument, and by the way, we've learned, and it is recognized amongst those scholars that debate such topics, that we win all the debates on all of these issues. The teleological argument, which explores this phenomena that we've discovered over the last 50 years, that everything's fine-tuned. The level of gravity, the rate at which certain things operate, like the speed of light, are all, if they deviate at all, there's no life. So it appears to be finely tuned. It appears to be designed. And we've learned that there's no reason for that. They don't have to be this finely tuned. There's no reason for the speed of light to be what it is. It could be a few miles difference per second, one way or the other. But if you did, no life. Or any of these, they found like 25 of these finely tuned values that our universe operates under. There's no reason for them to be defined where they are, but they are, and they're required to be that finely tuned forever. The cosmological argument, why does anything exist? And we went through some explanations, and I ended it with the four choices, remember? The four choices are the solipsist argument, which is there really is no existence. I just perceive a mirage. You're all just a mirage. Kind of a corny argument, but nonetheless there's still people that believe it. And then the other three arguments actually, are, well, the universe has always been here, or the universe sprang out of nothing, the Big Bang Theory, or that it didn't spring out of nothing, it sprang forth from a very intelligent mind. And we went and explored all those arguments, hopefully. You took some notes, so you can run those concepts through your mind, so that next time you get confronted with somebody that thinks they have a real good argument against what you believe, you can spring this on in love and hopefully influence them. All of these wonderful arguments has narrowed the field only. And the field has been narrowed to exclude the atheistic arguments, because the atheists are the ones that are coming up with these arguments that we've just talked about. We've eliminated and God requires faith. He's not in the business of proving himself. He is in the business, I have given you enough faith for you to believe. And we've explored verses which have included Romans chapter 1 and 2, which talks about how the creation that he created brings forth evidence of his being, his nature, and his existence. Thereby, no one has an excuse not to believe. So that alone, we do not need a missionary to show up at every tribe on planet Earth and tell them about Yeshua HaMashiach. Because right there in Romans 1, God said they will be held accountable for the knowledge that I have revealed in my creation. Kind of scary, but it's true. So we don't have to worry that God's going to get to the great white throne judgment and go, oh, shoot, Joe, I forgot about you. I didn't get a missionary to you. You don't have to worry about that. God has been thorough. So we've eliminated everything's a probability. What we want to do is discover what should we believe in? What has the most weight of evidence? And we've discovered that what we believe has the most weight of evidence. God doesn't want to remove faith. He wants to give us evidence for our faith. He's not a guy it expects us to believe blindly in anything, does it? He's given us enough evidence for our faith. So we've narrowed down the field to the religions of the world. The problem with a lot of the religions of the world, like Hinduism and Buddhism, a lot of these polytheistic religions that exist today and have existed in the past that people fed their children to, is they all believed, almost ubiquitously, they all believed in a universe that has always been here, or that a universe that popped out of nothing. Well, we've talked about those and how scientifically they have no legs to stand on. So we've eliminated a lot of those kind of religions. The only ones we haven't addressed, really, are the three mono religions. One is a polytheistic convert into monotheism, and that is, anybody know? Islam. Exactly. We won't get into that history, but they used to be polytheistic. These Muhammad morphed it into a monotheistic religion. Back 600, 700 AD. Assuming it is actually a monotheism, there are three great monotheistic religions of the world. Muslim, Judaism, and Christianity. And they all have different opinions about origins. The Muslims believe that, so what do they believe? They believe, check my memory banks, I didn't look that up in my notes this morning. They believe that they believe in the creation week, except that you can do whatever you want with the time frames of each day. So it can be billions of years. But the Christians aren't any better. They are the ones that came up with this thesis. Okay, it's called the day age theory. We're going to talk about that when we start studying Genesis 1. And the Christians also believe in the gap theory between verse 1 and verse 2 in Genesis 1. They believe that their God inserted, didn't talk about it, but inserted, 7, 8, 10 billion years, however many years the evolutionists need. They propose this idea that there's a gap and God inserted all these billions of years, and so that solves all the problems. Well, it really doesn't. We explore that. And then there are some believers in Yeshua that actually had the audacity to subscribe to a literal interpretation of Genesis. And then the Jewish religion is that the rabbis have taken this particular topic and have done the same thing that the Christians have done. They basically let the evolutionists have as many years as they want. They don't interpret the first chapter of the Torah literally. They interpret it figuratively, so it's just kind of a general spiritual concept. And there's a lot of different opinions, just like there is in Christianity, but their general thesis is that this evolutionary billions of years thesis is just fine with their Torah. Yes.
Okay. Why, John? Why? Why do you think, in your opinion?
Well, I'll give you the short version.
Yeah. Your digest, please.
Satan is prowling the landscape. And he has done, there's two monotheistic religions, Christians and Jews that represent Judaism. And what Satan has done is he has deceived both into mixing humanistic thinking into God's Word. And so both of these camps of monotheistic, both of these camps believe in the same God, okay? Right?
Yeah.
Yes? They believe in the exact same God, which is interesting. It's an interesting point in and of itself. But Satan has deluded both camps, or many of those people in these camps of belief, and stripped away foundational to Judaism. What he has done is he's stripped away the foundation of recognizing their Messiah and the need thereof. And to the Christian, he stripped away how to be holy. He stripped away the laws and Torah, which is how to be holy, not righteous. We talked all about that. So why have the rabbis arrived at this conclusion? Satan is after stripping away the most important issues and foundational topics out of both camps. If you can destroy and the literal interpretation of Genesis 1 and show that it's just a myth or a legend of some sort, why not the work of the Messiah? If you can, I mean, the whole Bible is built on Genesis 1. The whole law is built on Genesis 1 because it was the Shabbat that was embedded in the Ten Commandments, which was part of the law that he used as a foundational point to present the law to them. So if he's going to take that kind of liberty, he said, in 7 days you shall, or in 6 days you shall work, and on the seventh you shall rest. And so is he actually saying, well, I know that 7 days in Genesis were just kind of a concept. It's really billions of years. Isn't it a little bit disingenuous for him to tell Moses that you literally must follow this 7-day calendar, but all the time knowing full well that he didn't follow that 7-day calendar in the creation week? He was really kind of... So to answer your question, I know I'm giving you the long version, but Satan is out there trying to destroy foundational principles. So watch. Where do you see lots of conflict about a position? There's something there to be had of value, because Satan hates it. Remember in Daniel, I think it's in chapter 9, don't quote me on that, he says about the Antichrist, he says he will come and attempt to remove the feasts and the law. What is that communicating to you? That they're still applicable and they're important because they're foundational, right?
Amen.
So beware of Satan and where he attacks, because that is usually something that we need to work on personally or work on in a doctrinal sense in what we believe. So, what we're going to do now is try to eliminate some of these belief systems with, and what it'll do is it won't disprove Christianity, it won't disprove Judaism. What it'll do is unsubstantiate the rabbis or the pastoral teachings about origin topics. Okay? Because there's truth in both camps, correct? And it'll completely undermine Muhammad's proposition in his religion that he proposed. So what this evidence really is, it's a question. Did Yeshua really rise from the dead? One time I was listening to Dr. Walter Martin, and he was debating with a Buddhist. And the Buddhist was being proud and says, we bury our prophets and our gods, and we build temples big shrines over their graves. And Walter then put forth hope. We don't have a body. And all of a sudden, the lights went on. He realized that the most powerful miracle anyone could do after he's dead, I mean, that's pretty powerful, to do anything after you're dead, right? Not anyone would agree to that. You're dead and now you're going to pull off a miracle. It's one thing to pull off a miracle when you're alive, right? How many can do that? But it's a whole other thing to pull off a miracle when you're dead, and everybody knows it. Well, our God happened to be the only guy that's ever existed to pull off that kind of a miracle. Amen? That puts us in a very select little group of people that have a lot of foundation to stand on. So if you can substantiate that there's more evidence to believe that our God actually raised himself from the dead, from a not from a biblical perspective, but from a historical perspective, we can eliminate the entire field of other religious choices and narrow it down to one doctrinal position in regards to how we approach the Bible and understanding the texts that talk about origins. And of course, eliminating all the other religions in one fell swoop. There's 4 facts that historians, and now when I talk about historians, I'm talking about believing historians and non-believing historians, atheist historians, and agnostic historians. People from all stripes the vast majority of them believe in these 4 facts, historical facts. They have researched these positions and come to the conclusion that the records left in historical documents leave us no alternative to believe that these 4 facts are, in fact, a fact. And they're profound, actually. Let me list them off to you. That Yeshua, whose name is known also as Christ, Jesus, Yeshua received an honorable burial. In other words, most people that were criminals by the Roman government, and they got crucified by the Roman government, were just, many times, just thrown onto a heap in a dump. Okay, their body was dishonorably discharged. Okay, and there they rotted, and who knows what ate them eventually. Most people, most scholars, believe that he was given an honorable burial. Most scholars, again, believe that there, in fact, was an empty tomb. And they believe in the rumors that went around in the post-mortem appearances. In other words, after he died, he presented himself. Now, people try to come up with other reasons other than raising himself from the dead to account for that. But we're going to shoot all these things down because they have very few factual or what we know about the sciences to allow for such a thing. They just don't give you grounds to believe. And like that some people believe that, well, all these people that saw him were hallucinating. We'll talk about that if we have time. And the 4th fact that most scholars believe, and by the way, any scholars that don't believe are what would be termed fringe. They're very much in the fringe of scholarly thinking. Okay? The 4th fact is that the origin of faith in the Messiah was initiated by the previous 3. In other words, the fact that he rose from the dead, this was the origin of faith, starting with who? The disciples, right? So, Yeshua received, we're going to go through each one of these points and talk about them, and then we'll, if we have enough time, we'll end with some of the arguments that oppose some of these concepts. We probably won't, because, you know, I take much longer to get you my notes than I should. So we'll probably do this in a couple of sessions, but that's kind of where I'm going to go with this. These 4 facts, the honorable burial. There's almost no scholar that now does not recognize the fact that Joseph of Arimathea did in fact show up, ask the authorities if he could have Yeshua's body and bury it in a local tomb. And the accounts are everywhere in regards to this, historical accounts.
So you're saying that under, there's historically written testament to this, that he,
Yeah.
in other words, by the Romans, that this was recorded, that he showed and made a request.
What the Christian can do is point to, I think, 5 different, it's in Acts, Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, and 1 Corinthians 15:3, but about Paul. All these have references to, I believe they all have references to Joseph of Arimathea coming, I might not have included it in 1 Corinthians. And some people go, oh, you're trying to substantiate or prove the Bible by quoting the Bible. That's circular reasoning. That proves you're wrong. Your logic is incorrect. That's pretty tough. That's a good argument, isn't it? Just quote the Bible, prove the Bible. That doesn't work. You have to prove the Bible outside the Bible. But what's the error in their thinking? The Bible is a collection of historical writings. 66 books. In fact, there's more than that if you understand it from the Jewish perspective. And I forget how many, but it's over 70 books. And it's written by at least 40 authors over 3 continents, over 2,000 years. In fact, if you understand that Genesis was written probably by multiple authors, I've talked about this in months gone by, about there's an interesting writing pro forma in Genesis. I call it, the scholars call it a toledot, which means generations. In the generations of Adam. And then it goes and gives you a genealogy. And then every time there's 10 of these breaks. And it's called, the scholars recognize them as the 10 toledots. And what people believe is that somebody recorded that section of text because it spans several thousand years. One guy didn't write it. At least that's the proposition. And that these scrolls or these slabs that they wrote them on were highlighted at the beginning of each one by in the generations of, or in the generations of Adam, in the generations of Noah, in the generations of Abraham. You'll see all these, and they believe that the writing style, the technique, and the approach to the text is different in each one of them. And so what the theory is, I don't know if it's true or not, but to me it makes a lot of sense. The theory is that Moses, when God inspired him to write Torah, the first 5 books of the Tanakh, he had that assembly of ancient scrolls and tablets from which he copied Adam's and Noah's and the rest of these guys' recordations of what actually took place during those ancient times. If you believe that, then it's way more than 2,000 years. It's probably approaching 4,000 years of time. So we have I'm going to bring the mic up over here. We have a book that is not one book. It's a compilation, right up front here. It's a compilation of 70 books over maybe as much as 4,000 years of recordation of history written by at least 40 different people from all walks of life, everything from fishermen to kings and everybody in between, professional, non-professional. So you can't argue that it's circular reasoning when you quote Moses to prove John or vice versa. It's not one book. Yes?
That was a great answer. Another thing that lends credibility to the early writings is that they lived for hundreds of years, people did. So even if it was passed down orally, Noah could have known somebody that knew Adam.
Absolutely. In fact, there's only just Shem, the son of Noah, he could have known and probably did know Enoch. And Enoch probably knew Adam. So it's only a couple of renditions of the story evolving over several 1,600 years. You only needed maybe two witnesses, thank you, to keep track of these records. Good point. So, if we quote, when we approach a book like John or Matthew or Luke or Acts or the writings of Paul, don't think of them as one book. They've just been compiled several hundred years after they were written in the first century. Somebody compiled them into a book. It's kind of like, you get a solicitation in the mail for a collection of short stories by 20 different authors. How many of you received those? Well, you wouldn't say, oh, that's one book. You can't quote that. It's the same thing. No, these are different authors. They had different orientations, different cultural perspectives. So it's not illogical. It's not circular reasoning to quote one book to substantiate another. So when we look at these books, and we see all of them purporting that Joseph of Arimathea was the person who had possession of the body and buried Yeshua in a tomb, scholars, they do the same research. And they've come to the conclusion that probably Joe took the body down and buried it in a tomb. And thus he was given an honorable burial. There's no mention of the two thieves on either side of Yeshua, is there? Where were they buried? Probably in the trash bin. They didn't have bins in those days. They had a canyon to the west of Jerusalem where they threw all the refuse, including maybe these thieves. Instead of the proposal of that you're quoting from one book, the right question is, well, how valid are these historical records? People, and I should do a more thorough presentation of this, because we have, the media tears apart our Bible and tries to disubstantiate historically this foundation of truth and try to say that it's, we don't even know if those books are accurate. They're probably myths written down by people that were creating stories, none of which is true. No scholar believes that. Scholars recognize that the biblical documents are so substantiated and so stand head and shoulders, in fact, leaps and bounds over any other historical document that we've discovered. It's unprecedented. We have, I should have looked it up, we have literally thousands of records of, whether it's pieces or whole manuscripts of books or the entire Tanakh or the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament. We have literally thousands of pieces of what we call our Bible. No other historical document can say that. Sometimes as many as 3 or 4 or 10, maybe. And our documents are written very soon. This is focused on the New Testament. I won't focus on the Old. But it has the same applicability, these truths. You know, one thing scholars do to substantiate the truthfulness of a record of history is how soon the record was made after the purported facts that the guys are writing about. Well, most records that we have discovered are literally hundreds of years after the life of, for example, Aristotle. 400 years after his life do we even know anything about him. So how reliable is that record? It's 400 years old. That guy that wrote it didn't know Aristotle. Obviously, he copied from some other text and put these things, compiled this record about this man's life and his accomplishments. Well, how reliable is it? Yeah. Did he slip in his own opinion? Maybe. Maybe, we don't know. 400 years is a long time. There must have been other writers in between that did the same thing from which this guy copied and inserted into his record. Lots of error potential to creep into the text. This is ubiquitous within the historical ancient writings. Almost none of these writings were written by extant record keepers. Extant means they lived with the person that they wrote about. Let me tell you, the New Testament, oh yes, scholars, the fringe tries to negate this. But let me tell you, most scholars now realize that almost the entire New Testament was written by people that knew Jesus, Yeshua. This is unprecedented within the historical recordation world. Okay? All these accounts that attempt to undermine the validity of these writings are flat out wrong. Do the research yourself. You'll be profoundly astonished at how poorly the news media represents our Bible. It is not some Bible easily swept aside. It is very much substantiatable. In fact, I just read this a couple of months ago. You could destroy the entire whole versions of all the books in the entire Bible. Destroy them all the whole versions of like Peter and Deuteronomy and Matthew. And just from the early founding fathers in the 2nd century, their letters that they wrote to each other and to their congregations. And these are 2nd century authors. Just from their letters alone, you could recompile the entire Bible. That's how substantiatable God has preserved His Word for us. And all these people that believe that there's, thousands of errors, let me tell you, it's like less than 1%. And most of the errors are like in the context of there. Is it over there or is it theirs? It's the same word, but is it possessional or is it positional? Somehow the scribe flubbed up, right? It's no error that we've discovered has any influence on any doctrinal position. So the Bible comes down extremely, we have confidence that we have almost the exact rendition of the original copy. That's how accurate our Bible is. Yes.
In fact, we have testimonies from many people today that have set out to disprove the Bible that have since become believers because the Bible speaks so accurately of itself. People like Ted Pierce.
Yeah.
There's a book called Betrayed about a Jewish girl who became a believer in college, and so her parents were Jewish, set out to disprove the New Testament and became Messianic as a result.
That's right. There's many scholars that have done exactly that. whether they're evolutionists trying to write some thesis and disprove, Genesis 1, or atheists that, or historical scholars that try to disprove the Bible. Many of these similar histories or influences have happened where there's been conversions. People have tried to disprove it, and in the end find that, oh my gosh, I bought a lie. Another question?
Our archaeologists are finding all kinds of things that are proving the Bible, that people are saying didn't happen. They're finding all these things that say, yeah, it did happen. Here it is.
Absolutely. There was a scholar who died, I think, in the 1970s. His name was William Albright. He was one, in his day, he was one of the, and still recognized as a leading archaeologist. Said, at the end of his life, he said, I started this, he came from the German thinking that, it was called the Wellhausen theory, that the Bible was written by multiple authors that were all about 600 BC. So in other words, they all lied, because none of the authors subscribed to writing around 600 BC, except a few that were recording history during that time. But William Albright, in all of his archaeological explorations, he started out being an antagonist, just like Laura said. He ended up, at the end of his life, he said, you know what? I have not just not been able to find an error in the biblical text, but I actually use it as a resource to start my archaeological research and diggings, because it has been so accurate in, like people have talked about this city. We have never discovered this city written about by Joshua. He invaded the promised land, and he talks about all these cities and peoples. Some of these cities and peoples have never been discovered. Well, what has happened? The further we go on in history and we do archaeological exploration, what do we discover? We don't find that that city does in fact never exist. We actually find that, oh my gosh, that city does exist. In fact, there was a huge argument, I'm rabbit trailing, but anyway, about Jericho. Jericho said, a lot of scholars, historians, believe that the biblical text was completely in error because Jericho did not exist when the biblical text said it did, which it had to have been in existence if you believe in the literal interpretation of the Bible, around 1400 BC. Literally 1400 exactly BC, okay? So scholars go, no, that's way too early. It's more like 1250 BC is when the Jericho must have fallen. And what did they discover in the 40s and 50s when they did some of the previous century? When they started doing some explorations of Jericho, they found out that, lo and behold, it probably fell, and they can do all this discovery by pottery shards, because pottery is traded during periods of time, and it doesn't last very long in society because it's replaced by some new, just like us, we replace our china, and that goes out of, vogue, and we buy new china. Well, the same sort of thing happened with them. They would replace their pots and bowls and things of that sort, and get the new version, right? Well, they've been able to narrow the fall of Jericho down to around 1400 BC. And they've also discovered, very interesting, that the walls, how did they fall? They fell out. Well, they should fall in, but the walls fell out. And they've also discovered, which is very unique to Jericho, most of these city walls during this time period had no windows. And remember Rahab? She let the spies down a rope through the window outside. Very unique to Jericho. Jericho had windows in the exterior walls of the city defenses. all what? Substantiating that, gosh, even about windows, the Bible's accurate. You think? So, let's see.
Fact number 2.
So, we substantiated, hopefully, that Joseph had a, let's talk a little more about Joseph, his honorable burial for Yeshua. This is a very interesting idea. Now think about it. If you're going to create a myth or a legend, who are you going to have taking the body down and putting it in a tomb? The disciples, the friends, Mom, James, his family, right? But who does this? Joseph. Who's Joseph of Arimathea? He's a member of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin, just the day before, convicted the same guy to death on the cross. Creating a myth, you're not going to create that kind of a faux-pas in your story, are you? You're not going to come up with some guy that just voted to hang the guy, and he's going to be the guy that graciously provides his own tombs were valuable in those days. He laid him in his own tomb. That cost thousands of dollars, literally. It just doesn't have the earmark of a legend, doesn't it? You got the wrong guy providing this lovely, honorable burial.
Why do you think he did it then?
Well, I think, like the Roman guard at the foot of the cross, he had a come to truth moment, like a lot of people who witness these events, and he realized that he was part of a group that just dishonored his own religion. Because Yeshua didn't come to start a new religion. He came to fulfill one, right? Matthew 5:17, I haven't come to abolish the Torah, but to fulfill it. Torah, it's interpreted law, which is a very poor interpretation. It really represents, it's a word that represents the historical writings of Torah, the first 5 books. So he didn't come to abolish it. He came to fulfill. In Torah, you find prophecies about him coming to do this very thing. This account in Paul, 1 Corinthians 15, let me read it to you. For I delivered to you, and it's 1 Corinthians 15:3 is where I'm starting. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Messiah, died for our sins according to the Scriptures. What Scriptures? What's it referring to? The New Testament? No, it hasn't been compiled yet. So you're exactly right. Torah, but actually maybe even more accurately, the Tanakh. Right? And that he was buried, and that he was raised on the 3rd day according to the Scriptures. And that he appeared to Peter, then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep or have passed away. Then he appeared to James. Who's James? Yeah, his brother. Then to all the apostles. And last of all, as to one, I love this humility. And last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared to me. For I am the least of the apostles, and not fit to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God, or the ecclesia, or the congregation of God. Here we have Paul, and the reason I read this is scholars and historians recognize this passage. They've found documentation in ancient times that he's quoting from another document, verbatim. And that document goes back to within 5 years of Yeshua's resurrection. That's how early and close to the events some of these biblical writings go to. People say, these writings are hundreds of years after the fact. No, sometimes as little as 5 years. The entire New Testament, John was probably of Revelation was probably the last writer. People believe that it was probably written in the 90s AD. But John was a witness of the Messiah, so he was an eyewitness. All the rest of them were written most people believe they were written 40, 50, 60 AD. Another point, let's read Mark 15. (43) through 47. Joseph of Arimathea came, a prominent member of the council, Sanhedrin, who himself was waiting for the kingdom of God, and he gathered up courage and went in before Pilate. You want to kind of stay away. There's lots of trouble going on. You'd think this guy would just, I'm bailing out of here for a while, laying low. No, it took a little courage for him to do this. He went before Pilate and asked for the body of Yeshua. Pilate wondered if he was dead by this time and summoned the centurion. He questioned him as to whether he was already dead. And ascertaining this from the centurion, he granted the body to Joseph. Joseph brought a linen cloth, took him down, wrapped him in the linen cloth, and laid him in a tomb which had been hewn out of the rock, and he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Both Marys were eyewitnesses to this account. So why am I reading this? Why is this important? Well, it establishes multiple facts here. One, that he didn't swoon in the cool of the tomb and recover. He was dead. Centurion, let me tell you, he's not going to let anybody off a cross when Pilate's breathing down his back, or anybody's breathing down his back, or nobody's breathing down his back. That's not the way they did it. They followed their orders. They pulled the guy down after he was dead. We know the test. The sword went into his side, and blood and water came out. Doctors have come forth and said that's a sign of death. And I don't know if that's true, but that's what they report. But it also means, and it gives us a very important fact, everybody knew where they buried him. Okay? And that'll give us substantiation for some other points we're going to make later on. This discovery of the empty tomb. If everybody knows where the empty tomb, or where Yeshua was laid in this tomb, and everybody did, and the disciples decide to lie about the raising from the dead, all they have to do, whether they're scribes, Pharisees, priests, Pilate, the Roman guards, the disciple, anybody, all they have to do is go, oh, no, there he is. Just roll the stone back, look in the grave, and there's the body. But is that what happens? No. I mean, that would be an easy way to completely dispel this theory. But that's not at all what happens. So people wonder, what happened to the body? Some people propose, we'll get to this later, that the body was stolen, or that somehow he recovered, he wasn't dead, he recovered. But what would happen, what happened to the body? Some people point to the Gospel of Peter. Okay, the Gospel of Peter is not in your Bible. Okay, it's a 2nd century writing, disproves completely by the church fathers to be a fraud, but it has an account. And the reason I bring this up is it has the typical myth or legend kind of embellishments. Like he talks about in the story in the Gospel of Luke. The way this happens is 2 huge angels appear at the tomb. And surrounding the tomb are the centurions, the disciples, the priests, the Pharisees, and everybody who's anybody. Pilate, they're all circling the tomb. And they witness this coming out of heaven, 2 huge angels. They go into the tomb and they come out with Yeshua on either shoulder, and their heads reach up to the clouds. But Yeshua's head goes even beyond the clouds. And then they rise up to heaven and disappear. And then a cross comes out of the tomb, and a voice says to the cross, "Have you accomplished all that you're supposed to have accomplished?" And then another voice, the cross says, "Yes." See, now that's a typical embellishment that you would expect to find 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 years later after the fact. Those kinds of embellishments are signs that historians use to go, okay, this probably has some rudimentary foundational truth, but most of the story is just an embellishment to make it interesting. And it is kind of interesting, isn't it? A cross coming out and speaking. But the story in Mark is devoid of any embellishment at all. It just, he's laid into a tomb, and, both Marys show up, and the tomb's empty. And they walk away scratching their head. Well, there's no embellishment there. It's just probably the truth. You may be going, oh, that doesn't mean anything to me, but let me tell you, that's how scholars discover the viability of an ancient document, whether they're embellished with lots of these kinds of things or not. If they're just stripped bare of those kinds of embellishment, they put a special star next to that document going, this has more value. Some people propose that the disciples stole the body. So they snuck into the tomb in the middle of the night. Mind you, there's a guard of centurions. They are armed, and they know how to use their swords really well, guarding the place. But nonetheless, the disciples snuck quietly, rolled away the rock. If you put lubricants in the trough, like all good centurions, they're probably drinking, and then now they're kind of out of it. So they don't hear this rock being pushed away from the opening of the tomb, and they quickly but quietly go in and steal the body.
And fold the linen.
And yeah, they take time to do it right. They don't leave a mess. And they steal the body. Now, what's wrong with this theory, other than it's kind of funny? But some people actually have reported this. This was put out in the early 1700s. It's not a new theory. No scholar believes this mush. Now, there have been people writing books since I forget the name of the author, 1970s. He put this idea out, and it was acclaimed to be the truth, and all the pop readers read it and thought they had new evidence to not believe in the truthfulness of the Bible. But what the guy didn't include in his text was that nobody believes in, no scholar believes in this. This is laughable. It's been completely disproven. In fact, let's read Matthew 27. (62 through 67). Now on the next day, the day after the preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together with Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember that when he was still alive, that deceiver, Yeshua, said, 'After 3 days, I am to rise again.' Therefore, give order for the grave to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal him away and say to the people, 'He has risen from the dead.' And the last deception will be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard. Go make it as secure as you know how." And they went and made the grave secure, and along with the guard, they set a seal on the stone. So here we have two parties that completely negate Yeshua's claim to be God. Okay, Pilate didn't believe it, the Roman government didn't believe it, and the Pharisees and Sadducees and the priests, they didn't believe it, and they wanted to make sure that this guy's prophecy about himself, rising up 3 days later, didn't happen. So they put a guard there to make sure that no rumor mill started. But think about this. Okay, and this gets right at the heart. Here you have 12 guys who are blamed by this theory of coming and stealing the body. Okay, it's dead. We'll get to the other theories where he swooned in the tomb theory next Shabbat, hopefully. But this theory is interesting. Here you have 12 guys who steal away the body somehow. The guards are sleeping. In fact, that's what the text actually says. We'll get to that maybe next week. Because when they discover that the body's missing in the morning, the centurions run off to the priests and go, "The body's gone." And what do the priests go? "Oh, we know where the body is. Here, it's right here." What do the priests do? They put forth the idea that go and tell everybody, especially your authorities like Pilate, that the disciples stole away the body. Okay. They're promoting the same, and then it follows with, and this rumor spreads even to this day. Now, is this credible? I mean, you got 12 guys coming, stealing away the body, and then what do? They go and start up a new religion. Actually, they perpetuate Judaism, except it's a new branch that recognizes the Messiah. Okay? But they know it's a lie. And then what do? They start raising funds. They have giant garage sales of other people's stuff, and they go around the landscape going, we're poor, we need money, and people start giving it to them because they have such a great story, a risen king. And they put in their bank accounts and their 401k plans all of this money, and then they live a life of ease for the rest of their lives. Is that what happens? These, what would be idiots if it were true, then go and have the craziest idea to go and allow themselves to be crucified. Or what they know full well is a myth that they created themselves. Now, it's one thing to die for something you believe. A lot of people do that, right? It's called martyrdom. It's a whole nother thing. It's a whole nother thing to go and die for what you believe, but you in fact know that what you believe is a phony story. How many are willing to do that? You're willing to sacrifice, and these people just didn't line up against the wall, boom, like the Nazis did to many people. They didn't die that way. I mean, Peter was crucified upside down. That doesn't sound like much fun. A lot of these people were like boiled in boiling oil. You know, this wasn't like a fun activity that these people went through. And they did this and allowed this. I mean, if I would have made it up, well, what would you have done? If you would have made up this story and the pot's bubbling in front of you, I would have said, okay, joking! Right?
Absolutely.
You're going to be the distributor of truth. You're going to have a moment that you're going to disseminate the truth and dispel this crazy rumor. But you don't have any of this. None of these people do this, nor is there any gain. What's the gain? I mean, what is the typical gain? Women, money, and political power. None of them ran for elected office. You don't find any of them chasing after women. There's no recordation, extra or intra-biblical historical records. And there's no money. In fact, the only money raised is so Paul can give away. What's wrong with this story if it is in fact a story? It doesn't cut the mustard, does it? We have 5 minutes, so I'll end it with this idea. I think, does God exist? After we've examined some of these topics, we're going to continue to examine some of these. A better question than, does God exist, is knowing the history of mankind. Why does God bother? Right? I mean, look at your own life. Or if you don't think you're that bad, look at your neighbor's life. They're definitely worse than you are, right? Or look at other people in history. They're far worse. Hitler, I mean, we can think of all kinds of despots. Why does God bother with mankind? Why did that God just go, you know, he should have taken up Moses' idea. He proposed to Moses. It wasn't Moses' idea, it was his own idea. He was testing Moses. Moses goes, no, we need to work with your people here. God goes, no, I'm just going to wipe them all out and start with your progeny. And Moses protests. I mean, if I was God, that's what I would have done. But thank goodness for myself and us all that God is far more patient and loving. Why does God bother? We see this in Psalms. The answer, other people were not the first to come to this conclusion. We see David in Psalms 8:4. What is man that you take thought of him? Or Hebrews. What is man that you remember him? Or the Son of Man that you are concerned about him? I mean, you're being kicked by man their entire life, and you still are concerned about their well-being. Most humans don't respond that way, but our God does. Thank goodness for that. Or even Job in 7:17. What is man that you magnify him and that you are concerned about him? In spite of ourselves, he is concerned and he keeps you in his mind all the time. He loves, adores, and cares for you. In spite of mankind's history, and in spite of you and me, and our propensity to disregard, not listen, and believe lies about him. In spite of that, he still loves you. And he cares about, let me tell you what he cares about. I've been asked, what's God care about? And I come to this conclusion. Anything, and more, by the way, but at the minimum, anything you care about, he cares about. So if you cared about which blouse or shirt or shoes or whatever to put on this morning, so did he. But he also cares about keeping Mars in motion just right so it doesn't collide with the Earth and everything in between. Unfortunately, God's a gentleman. He's not going to force himself on us. If we don't believe in him, he's going to go, well, I wish you would choose otherwise, because I do in fact exist, and I love and adore you, and have gone out of my way to make it known to you. But you're choosing otherwise. I'm a gentleman. I'm not going to remove your choice, because love requires what to be true?
Free will.
Choice. Free will, exactly. We can't remove choice. So far, if you've attended these 4 or 5 exposés of the evidence for God, I think you have to come away with, you know what? Those crazy believers in the Messiah have some pretty good evidence and support for their position. By the way, the rebuttals to this are, it's fun to watch the debates because they're funny. Some of these poor guys, you feel sorry for them. They're on the other side. They just get embarrassed. But we've got some really good evidence for our side. And my question to all of us is, what are we waiting for? Whether you're a non-believer or a believer that needs to get about the business of the one you believe in. By the way, the one you believe in is not just, like, you might believe that I exist. So what? But this guy is the creator. So you think that's more important, and his word might be more important to listen to? Yes?
Yeah.
What are we waiting for? Don't go home and just put what you learn in the freezer. Yeah, it'll preserve it, but not for your benefit. What are we waiting for? Let's get about his business. Amen?